Good morning, everyone. So, I've been having a good time in Zen by going backwards and reading lots of old Suzuki Roshi Dharma talks. And, okay, we heard this. There's something to be said for proximity to genius. Um, One, it keeps you humble. Two, it kind of makes it more difficult for you to drop your standards and indulge yourself. But three, Suzuki Roshi had this incredible knack for explaining tricky, arcane stuff to Americans. And the more I read it, the more I see what a splendid job he's done. And then I step back and I look at the thousands of Zen centers that have blossomed in America since he came here. Not only San Francisco Zen Center and Green Gulch Zen Center and Tassajara Mountain Center, but all the students that have gone out like seeds blown by the wind and started centers in North Carolina and Chicago and all over the country. So I think what I'm going to be doing for a while is I'm going to go over some of these lectures, like really line by line, and try to open them up because sometimes his English is really quixotic. And my teacher was Suzuki Roshi's assistant and knew him intimately. He's one of the last few people at Zen Center, like Reb Anderson and Lou Richmond, maybe Ed Zazen, who actually knew Suzuki Roshi. And so I have the ability to go over things that sound confusing to me, and he knows Suzuki Roshi's mind so well that over the years it's kept me pretty upright. It's been a good ballast. So this talk today is called Contradiction in Human Nature. And it's a good one. And like me, maybe the reason that I like Suzuki Roshi so much is that he's discursive. His mind's very calm, but something like my own, it's sort of like watching a gerbil in a weasel cage, just scoot around. So I'm going to go through this kind of sentence by sentence. So the first thing he says is our study, our effort or practice. Our effort or practice. So you'll see that this is going to be explained a little farther on, but effort is practice. We're not practicing to get the ball to the goal line. We're not practicing to be enlightened. The effort that we make is our practice, and that's a really important thing to remember. Our effort or practice should be firmly supported by Buddha's wisdom. He's not saying you have to be a Buddhist. He's not saying you have to worship Buddha, but Buddha's wisdom. And Buddha's wisdom, in a way, is your own wisdom. It's the wisdom of the universe. Buddha nature is the unformed, formless, generative part of the universe that contains all contradictions, all questions, all answers. You remember in the Heart Sutra it says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form. We've talked about it, but I'll touch on it lightly, which is that Buddha's understanding of dependent origination was that nothing exists solely by itself, not a single thing, not a speck of dust. That everything is dependent on other things for its existence. No sunlight, no apple tree. No sunlight, no apples. No water, no apples. No microbes in the soil, no apples. No pollinating insects, no apples. So it's not a stretch to say that when something is composed of all these other things, that it doesn't actually have its own innate existence. And the confusion about that is one of the central delusions of humankind. It's not that Buddha is saying you don't exist or you're not there and I'm not over here. But that way that we think of you, that way that we think of I itself is erroneous. So that we're simultaneously an expression of the universe which is empty of a fixed self, and also an expression of the entire universe. We represent the entire universe. And that's Buddha's wisdom. And so to say that our practice should be supported by that is kind of a grave reminder of where you want your mind to be. You don't want your mind to be concentrated on yourself. You're not studying Buddhism to have a nice life. You're studying Buddhism to help other people. You're studying Buddhism to be in harmony with the way the universe itself works. And the more that we chase enlightenment, the more that we imagine self over here and enlightenment over here, and they're not going to come together. So it's why all the admonitions are just sit. Don't worry about enlightenment, just sit. Concentrate on your breath. You may come to realize how true Buddha's teaching is to the circumstances under which we suffer. Remember, Buddha gave us the Four Noble Truths: affliction, arising, containment, and marga, the Eightfold Path. The first noble truth is affliction. Shit happens. It's not your fault. It's like we're all facing a peppered wind. When stuff happens, stuff arises in the mind. What arises is not your fault. The next step is the first one you can do something about, which is containment, nirodha. And we learn through practice, we learn through understanding dependent origination, that what arises is actually ephemeral. And though it may feel powerful, passions, feelings, impulses, sensation, consciousness, it is ultimately containable. And what that becomes once contained is the fuel that powers our existence. So there's no judgment about affliction or arising. The question is, do you throw gasoline on the ground and light it? Or do you put it in the container of a motor and do some work in it? So our body and our containment is the motor, and the work that we do is the Eightfold Path, modeling the existence of a Buddha. Right speech, right view, right livelihood, right effort, etc., etc. When you realize how this teaching is true, then you'll begin your practice. But he cautions us. When you're jumping from one place to another, it's difficult to teach you how to practice like Buddha practices. What's he mean, jumping one place to another? Well, I know lots of spiritual pilgrims, I call them. They're people who say things like, oh, I don't like organized religion, or I just pick and choose. On Wednesday, I go to the hugging guru. On Thursday, I go to Zumba class. On Mondays, I sit Zazen. And under that kind of schedule is a kind of not so disguised search for personal pleasure. And actually, by the same token, fleeing of discomfort, fleeing of the kind of deep work that actually cuts us free, lets us see through our suffering. When you're jumping from place to place, it's difficult to teach you how to practice Buddhism. So jumping from place to place makes me think of a water strider running across the surface of the water on these long extended legs. But if we want depth, what is Buddha's practice? Well, it's the practice of Zazen, which is sitting still. It's staying in place. It's making a determination to stay in place. It's difficult. Your legs hurt, it's uncomfortable. But each of these obstacles, each of these things that make practice difficult, is actually also a teacher. teaches you things about yourself that you'll never come in contact with if you're just running to the bar for a quick one, or if you're doing Javanese meditation today and some other kind tomorrow, something else the next day. If you continue your practice, you'll discover your own posture, good or bad. And what he means by that is you'll find your own personal way of sitting. And Suzuki Roshi doesn't judge it at all. If you continue your practice, you'll find your own posture, good or bad. Then from within practicing, impulses or guidance may arise. We may say, oh, it's better for me to put a little pressure in my stomach, little strength in my stomach. Oh, I'm leaning forward, or I'm leaning back. And little by little, it's our effort to get better without making ourselves wrong. It's the effort itself, which is the practice. It's not the goal of sitting perfectly. It's the constant monitoring and watching the breath and the mind and what comes up and the posture and learning how to sit still and experience your life without distractions. Because in that moment, everything is there, the entire world. You're the center of the world. You're the center of your own world. So that you have your own individual posture is to say that we all have some bad habits. I mean, I tend to fall asleep. I tend to lean forward. I have to really remind myself to sit up straight, to put a little downward pressure on my hara, keep my tongue up on the roof of my mouth so I don't drool. And when it's clicking, when everything's going just right, it's a pretty good experience. And it's not like you get it once and you've got it. Come back over and over and over. Suzuki Roshi used to say, you're perfect just the way you are, and you could use a little work. And it's that sense of using a little work where we never rest on our laurels. We never say, oh, I'm done now. Oh, I'm enlightened. I've had Kensho. I've had whatever. Phew. The rest of your life, we say Buddha's still working on himself. And so should we. That's the practice. The practice is keeping our mindfulness about the body, which is to say, keeping our mindfulness about the universe, what's going on. When we actually watch our breath, you'll see there are all sorts of little back eddies and fillip and bumps. It's not just a tube going in and out or just a simple revolving door, as Suzuki Roshi said. There are lots of back eddies, and this is gas that's moving around like smoke. So we want to follow those with our mind. We don't want to just say, oh, I'm breathing, and have an idea of breathing. We want to actually become breath. And whatever breath becomes, we become in that moment. And those are practices of like house training our mind, practices of stillness, practices of intention that get better and better the more we do it. Without bad habits, we can't improve our posture. And the reason we have a form is so we have a kind of model. If I could meditate like this, and you could meditate like that, you'd never have a standard by which to judge your own growth or your improvement. So the Buddha showed us how to meditate. And for 3,000 years, people have been doing that. It's not personal. There's a form that's been worked out that really does the job. And it's an act of humility that we stay open to it. We're free enough to be open to being taught. That's a big deal. Not like, well, I like that part of it, I don't like that part of it, so I'm going to just pick the peanuts out of the pistachios. No, we're open to experience, we're open to teaching, and then we try our best. We try our best because ideally the person who's teaching us is representing Buddha's wisdom and has had some experience of it to have been given permission to teach. Doesn't make them a better, smarter, wiser, deeper person than you are. but it means they've trained in this way. And in the same way that you might want a surgeon who'd graduated medical school, then vet school, you listen to him. You might not listen to him about, how to deal with your mate, but you're going to listen to him about surgery. You're going to listen to him about your health. And so that's what he means by being open, supported by the Buddha's wisdom. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, dependent origination. Now, there's another byproduct. All of Buddha's teaching is to do something. Buddha was not trying to make people happy. He was trying to enlist people in a huge planet-wide narrative to help other people, to help them break through the puzzles of their suffering, to help them break through the nets, to help them understand the essential, formless nature of reality. That's what enlightenment is about. Enlightenment is not about hopping a fence and being in cotton candy land, where for you, everything's groovy from then on out. First of all, it doesn't happen that way. But second of all, why would Buddha teach that? Buddha wants the people that get there first to help others come across. The whole image of a bodhisattva is someone who postpones their enlightenment until the last person is across. It's a kind of brilliant contribution to human thought because it ends spiritual competitiveness. Now, you guys go ahead, I'll help the others. When everybody's over, then I'll look to my own enlightenment. It's pretty profound. Anyway, he says, the more you practice, the more you find the true, deeper meaning of your practice. Just be friendly, frank, and straightforward. We should be more free. We should accept instruction. This is our way. Now he goes on to a different subject, a little bit. The way-seeking mind arises when we come to feel the evanescence of life. Remember, I've said before that nobody has any strong, deep feelings about artificial flowers because they're not dying. Flowers are precious because they're dying. Human life is precious because it's not permanent. It has a sell-by date. Everything is evanescent and passing. And once you see this, and once you actually can be honest and frank about your own fears of dying, who's living, who's dying, what's it all about, Alfie? That's where your practice really starts, once you see that. Very often it's some tragedy, very often it's losing someone close to you, very often it's just a sense of unease and just meaninglessness. But that's the point where you start. Now that's how Buddhists work. On Sunday you may go to church, but to you going to church and your everyday life are two completely different activities. Eventually you'll feel some contradiction in your everyday life if you're awake. And some uneasiness, feeling you have nothing to rely on. It's this feeling which gives way to the way-seeking mind. You know, if you go to church or you go to temple, you go to the mosque one day a week, and the rest of your life is sort of another sort of activity, stuff is going to come up that you can't possibly square with the teachings that you're receiving in shul or church or the mosque. And when you start to get a sense of your own evanescence, you start to feel your body aging, your energy flagging, people close to you die. It shakes the hell out of you, raises profound questions. So that's oftentimes when people double down to Buddhist practice. When you're young enough to act as you want, Suzuki Roshi says, you can choose something good and you can ignore something bad. You can't actually, but you think you can. And by working on something good, You may feel good enough to spend much of your early life. But some uneasiness, some dark feeling will follow you in your life. Even though you try to appease your conscience by working hard and exhausting yourself on what you're doing, this kind of effort will not give you any conviction. Jumping around in this world without conviction may be the most pitiful life. Now, why is that? When you're young enough to act as you want, you choose to do something good. I'm going to save the last gay whale. I'm going to end human suffering. I'm going to work for civil rights. I'm going to work for whatever. And you just ignore everything bad, everything that's not going to help you. And you go straight forward, and it's kind of one-sided thinking. There's an expression in Japanese that is tambankan. And tambankan means one board fellow. And the image is of a guy carrying a board sideways on his shoulder, upright like this. So he can see everything on, sorry, the screen's backward. He can see everything on this side. He can't see anything on this side. It's a perfect model for just looking at the reality that we want to see, concentrating on what we want to see and ignoring what we don't. So this is a curious thing to say, but he goes on, you'll be pitied by someone who has strong conviction and deep wisdom concerning our life. Thus, we should be ashamed of doing something proudly, vigorously, with some ecstasy even, ignoring the other side of the world, the dark side of life. There was an early Japanese Zen master named Fuketsu, and he gave a koan once, which was something like, if you pick up one speck of dust, the temple, the nation, everything thrives. If you don't pick it up, nothing happens. Everything crumbles. So what a speck of dust was doing anything. You think it's a speck of dust. You think you're just picking up this little speck of dust. It could be building a Zen temple. It could be building world peace. It could be building the Democratic Party. It could be voter turnout. But you're not just picking up a little speck of dust. You're picking up the entire world. And for every good you do, there will be an equal amount of bad, sometimes more. And when we first see that, when we first come into contact with that, it's really unsettling. You know, you watch the Democratic Party grow up, and you have all these ideals about it and what its values are and what its work in the world is. And then as you get more and more familiar, you start to find out how it makes its money and what it does to make its money and what it gives away and how it compromises things you considered very important. And so we're always trying to separate the good from the bad, but we can't. So there are some people who don't pick up the speck of dust. There are some people who can just watch the world suffering and not be moved by it. But I'm assuming that if you're here for Dharma talk, like me, you're someone who can't just sit idly by. So we do something. We pick up the speck of dust. But if we don't know that we're picking up the entire world, we're cruising for a bruising. We're not just picking up the good stuff we imagine. We're picking up the entire world, and everything we do will be tainted with the entirety of the world. So when Suzuki Roshi says, thus we should be ashamed of doing something proudly, vigorously, with some ecstasy even. What he means is that when you feel that way, you're a one-board fellow. You're not looking at you yourself are creating the dark side because it's inherent in our nature, even though we're doing good. He's not saying don't do good. He's not saying don't try, don't make an effort. But to do it with pride, like somehow you represent goodness in the world, you virtue signal at everyone who doesn't do that, that's complete ignorance. It's not Buddha's way. I've given this example many times because I'm so moved and affected by it. But I remember during the shock and awe campaign once, I was a guest on Bill Maher's show when we were bombing Baghdad. And I offended all the other guests there by saying, well, this is a war crime. We're dropping bombs on a hotel with women and children in it in the middle of the night. And we're exempting ourselves because we're the good guys and we don't like the leader of that country. Well, we're not exempted from the consequences of what we do. And we certainly weren't exempted from the consequences of the IEDs and the resistance and the sniping and the killing and wounding of our soldiers, which resulted about a month after we were greeted as heroes for throwing Saddam Hussein out. Because when people saw why we were there, that we were guarding the oil but not the libraries, they began to get angry. It's a perfect example. You're never doing just what you think. You're never just liberating Iraq. You're never just getting rid of a bad guy. You pick up a speck of dust, you pick up the entire world. So what that means is that you have to behave tentatively. You have to behave and refine every minute, always looking. Is the situation different? Has it changed? Is this still working the way I'm doing it? Because reality is always moving, and only our ideas are fixed. So when we do something, we have to stop. Oh, am I creating consequences? I mean, here's the United States that has disparities in income between rich and poor that are greater than Saudi Arabia. We didn't start out to do that, but somehow we got there by following a path and not investigating and not correcting and not looking back. It's not a question of good or bad because human nature is both. It's always both. And to forget that is to shroud yourself in ignorance and to do a great deal of harm by thinking of yourself as the good guys and those are the bad guys. By nature, human beings have good and bad sides. Half and half, says Suzuki Roshi. When you want to do something good, at the same time, you don't want to do something good. If you want to get up early, at the same time, you say, I'll stay in bed 5 more minutes. So we're always conflicted like that. Oh, I'm on a diet, but I'll just have 1 chocolate chip cookie. I can't have just 1 chocolate chip cookie. It's too early. At the same time, you want to get up. You say to yourself, yeah, no, yes, I'll just do a little long. Yes is 50%, no is 50%, or more. He says bad things, 60%, good things, 40%. It comes with the territory of picking up 1 speck of dust. The more you reflect on yourself, or the more we reflect on ourselves, the more conscientious we become. So the more conscious we become, the more difficult it is on us because we're looking more clearly and we begin to think that we're doing more and more bad things. I make myself crazy sometimes because I think 50 years I've been sitting Zazen and I laid my fountain pen down 10 seconds ago and I can't find it. Or the spoon I was stirring my oatmeal with. Where is it? How could it disappear? I haven't moved. Well, we're all like that, maybe more so as we get older. So the more conscientious you become, the more you become aware, and the more you feel like everything you're doing is wrong. That's actually human nature. It's not a matter of what's good and what's bad. It's a matter of our human nature. That's the way we are. That's the world we get enlightened in. That's the world we suffer in. We're never going to pour a gallon jug into a pint pitcher. The gallon jug is the universe with everything in it. And the pint pitcher is our ideas of what we want. Let's just get the bad stuff out. We'll just keep the good stuff. Everything will be groovy. No, it won't, because our nature is 50% light and 50% shadow. We have all these dark, welling impulses. And remember, they once served us. when we were proto-humans, when we were primates, when we were early hominids. You know, to be greedy about the food gave you a survival advantage. To be acquisitive gave you an advantage. To hate strangers that were trying to get your food gave you an advantage. And we have all of those echoes in our DNA. But we're not bound to them. We're bound to them if we believe everything we think. But actually, when we sit Zazen and we dissolve into emptiness and we watch these things bubble up and disappear and bubble up and disappear, we realize, oh, I could contain it. I don't have to be jerked around by this puppy. Oh, I can learn this practice. I can learn to contain my dark side, not let it pass my teeth, not let it energize my muscles. Now, this is interesting. This is something I've been guilty of struggling with a lot. The more human culture advances, the more difficulties we'll have in our life. The advancement of civilization will accelerate this contradiction in our nature. When we realize the absolute presence of our contradictory nature, the way-seeking mind arises and we begin to work on ourselves instead of the material world. The advancement of civilization will accelerate this contradiction in our nature. Why? Because we're picking and choosing. We're working on the world outside of us. Oh, we could have a well, we could have a pump, we could have water. The women don't have to carry water. It's a noble goal, but it's attached to a lot of other stuff. And he's not saying don't build a well, but he's saying build the well cautiously, build the well delicately, find out what the umbilical cord's coming from the well. There was one African village I read about where they put a pump in the middle of the village, and the women missed the long walks together with one another, chatting and talking. They had to walk 4 or 5 miles to get water. I saw this in Rwanda and Tanzania, and women carrying 60-pound jerry cans of water on their head. And then the government of Tanzania put spigots in each of the villages, so they didn't have to do that. The government of Rwanda didn't. I must say, every woman I talked to in Tanzania loved having a spigot in the village. But you can see these ideas to advance civilization, to advance the exterior world, to make changes in our material existence. That's not really where we should be looking. Because that idea is fueled by our 50-50 nature. And when we're looking at changing the material world, we think we're just looking at it with the good side of our nature, or the side that we like. But you pick up the speck of dust, you pick up everything. You make a commitment to do something, the entirety of your nature is doing it. There's as much bad as good. It's unavoidable. So most people who are interested in Buddhism are more or less critical of our social condition, expecting a better framework. I'm certainly one of them. Equity, political protections, voting rights. I think those things are important. I'm going to work for them. Some people become disgusted with our human life. We can't approve of these criticisms fully because they don't rest on the full understanding of our human nature. So whether you love your life or whether you hate your life, you're just looking at an isolated part of it. You're forgetting that your life is beyond judgment. It's like looking at a warbler. You're an emanation of emptiness. You're an expression of the primal, pregnant, roiling energy of the universe. And you need to pick and choose softly, carefully, delicately in what you do, because you know that your nature is binary, and it's as much darkness as it is light. Human nature is always the same. Some people say our spiritual culture will progress when our material civilization progresses. Certainly Marx believed that, If we just change the relationship of people to capital and ownership of the means of production, we will create a different kind of person. And millions of people died trying to do that. That didn't seem to have worked out so well. Even though Marx was a great thinker, he certainly understood capitalism. And one of the people that understood Marx better than anyone was Nelson Rockefeller, because he was on the other side. But Marx knew what he was talking about. He just didn't know biology. He didn't know human nature. He didn't know how to run a government. Strictly speaking, as long as we have human nature, it's impossible to obtain a perfect, idealistic spiritual culture in the world. Think about it. As long as we have human nature, it's impossible to obtain a perfect, idealistic spiritual culture in our human world. It's because good and bad is always stepping forward. Picking up the speck of dust is always recreating the entirety of the world. Greed, hate, delusion, enlightenment, living, dying, it's all there. And just think of an organization think of a perfect organization. I can't. Sometimes I get cross with Buddhism, and I'll say, yeah, the problem with Buddhism is there's people in it. Well, it's the same with everything, because we're not aware of our nature. And if we're not aware of it, we're not on guard for it. If we think of ourselves as the good guys or as good people, well, I'm a good person, so whatever I do must be good. And that's how you wind up bombing a hotel in the middle of the night. We should fully realize this point. Because of our uneasiness, we're too anxious to achieve something perfect in our spiritual life. Something perfect in our spiritual life is usually our idea of enlightenment, which will run over everyone else, trying to get there first. Then I'll turn around and help you. But maybe it's just maintaining ideas of perfection, ideas of luminosity without shadow. Every light casts a shadow. There's some danger here. Our spiritual life can't be regarded as we've come to regard our material life. You can't work on your spiritual life the same way you do a material life. Even though you build a beautiful church, your religion may not improve. Even though you talk about your spiritual life thousands of times, it doesn't make you a better Buddhist. This makes you a talkie Buddhist. It's necessary to know actually what is our human world, what is our human nature. This is a very important point. If you fail to observe our human nature fully, even though you study Buddhism, what you learn is not what Buddha meant. If you don't know who you are, if you don't know that you encompass the totality of human possibility, you're like a radio tuned to the human frequency. And every impulse that can blow through any human being on earth can blow through you. And if you don't know that, you won't be on guard for the negative ones and the shadowy ones. And they'll leak out of your mouth, or you'll steal the gum or whatever it is without thinking. Because I'm not a bad person, but the gum was right there. Nobody was looking. For many years, we've been practicing Zazen here at Zen Center, and we think it's time we made some progress. I think so, he says. You think so as well. But when we feel this way, we should be careful not to mistake our progress, not to mistake our way. We should know what is the way-seeking mind and what is human nature. The way-seeking mind is our effort to improve, to get knowledge, to get wisdom. That exists within the blanket of human, within the parameters of human nature. And we have to pick our way through. You know, it's like walking through a beautiful flowered field full of cow potties hidden in the grass. We have to pick our way through. We have to constantly be checking and rechecking because we're all the same. There are no good guys. There are only humans. Some people may say if human nature is always the same, it's useless to practice Zazen or to study Buddhism. But our study is based on this fact. It's based on knowing that fact. And it's the idea of purity that leads us into folly. It's the idea of suppressing the negative, shadowy sides of ourselves and only being a light bulb switched on without any shadow. That's what makes us dangerous. That's what makes us foolish. Our study is not to improve on the actual fact that we have good and bad. It's an important point. Our study is not to improve on the actual fact, the reality of our existence, that our nature is half good and half bad. We shouldn't try to improve upon this actual fact. Buddha accepted that fact. He started Buddhism because of that fact. He based it on this truth. And if you try to change this truth, you're not a Buddhist. So the reason there's an eightfold path, the reason that there are four noble truths, is to help us, guide us when we have decisions to make, when stuff comes up, to know how wicked we can be when we're sleepy, when we're not wide awake. And Buddha knew this, and this is the world from which we become enlightened. We're not gradually transforming ourselves to be more and more and more pure, and then we pop and we awake as a lotus flower. The lotus blooms in the mud, and our roots are in the mud. Buddha said our human life is a life of suffering. This is a fundamental truth. He didn't say suffering. He didn't use the word suffering. He used the word dukkha. And he defined the word. And dukkha was birth, illness, grieving, wanting to maintain a pleasant situation, wanting to repel an unpleasant situation. There's a list of things that was dukkha. And this is why David Brazier, in his book, The Feeling Buddha, substitutes the word affliction for suffering, because suffering has a kind of Christian element to it. And it tends to make us think of mental events when it's as physical. I mean, Buddha died of food poisoning. Buddha got a terrible infection in his foot at one point, got sepsis. Being enlightened does not protect you from the world's afflictions. Knowing this fact, knowing that everyone is suffering, that everyone is afflicted by the dark side of their nature, by the circumstances of what comes up, still, step by step, we can help each other. Step by step, we can help each other. Step by step, we can help each other. We're all in the same boat. And when we realize we're all in the same boat, what kind of an advantage are you going to get over someone? What is there to do? but be helpful. Because we have good and bad, half and half, that's why we can help. If all of us were good, it would be impossible to help other people. If all of us were enlightened, nobody would need anything. There wouldn't be a need for community. There wouldn't be a need for the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. It's a good thing that we have good nature and bad nature, and we're able to feel the improvement no matter how slightly we change. This is really important. Suzuki Roshi is not judging you because you have darkness in you or because you have shadow in you. But if you can move, at one point he says, the distance of the thickness of a piece of paper. If by your application of will, you can change the proportion of good to bad in your own life, that's a wonderful thing. It's never going to be a battle that's over. It would be wonderful if we could help another even by a hair's breadth. It makes no difference what sort of problems or situation in life we have. If we have something to work on, it's enough. Pick something. Dedicate yourself to working on it. Do it thoroughly. Do it consistently. Doing it every day. Because we have good and bad, half and half, because we can find some way to help others, if only by the width of a sheet of paper, by a few words, we can enjoy our life. The way-seeking mind should be realized in our actual world, which includes flowers and stones and stars and moon. The true way-seeking mind can only be actualized full scale, with the entirety of creation, not just the good side of us. Where there are human beings, there is the sun and stars, land and ocean, fish and grass and birds. Without this vast area to live in, where we can have our various problems, where we can work out our various destinies, we can't survive in this world. But forgetting this vast realm where we have absolute freedom, and that's what nirvana is. In the very next instant, you are free to do whatever you want. It's absolute. You may not know it, but that's the way it is. We have absolute freedom. If we seek for something merely for the sake of ourselves, just for human beings, we're going to suffer our nature, which has good and bad, 50-50. But when we become aware of the big realm, which includes everything, then we have big mind. And then we can have big trust. Because we know that despite being half and half, we're being supported by the entire universe, or we wouldn't be here. It doesn't take much to end a human life. A little blood vessel goes in your brain. A nerve stops going to your heart. I mean, that's it. But until that happens, we're supported by the entire universe. And we have the freedom to do anything. And Buddha's saying the thing to do is help each other. Help one another while you work on yourself. Enjoying our nature as a part of this vast world, we have no uncertainty. Because we know there's nowhere to go. This is our reality. This is our world, the way it is, good and bad. Life and death is not our problem anymore. Good and bad is not our problem anymore. The world was created with it. We attain enlightenment in this realm. We suffer in this realm. We're ignorant of the limits of the world. Here we don't even have the problem of attaining enlightenment. Ignorance is good. Enlightenment is good. Zazen is good. To stay home is good. Every activity will take place in this big realm. All of our human efforts, all of our human culture should be based on this kind of imperturbable conviction that we're part of all of it. We don't get to carve off a little reality, a little selfish kingdom just for ourselves. So our bad sides are not as bad as we think they are when we look at them against the entirety of reality. Oh my God, I didn't put an LED light bulb in my house. So until you do, you don't have to punish yourself for it. When Dogen attained enlightenment, he said he forgot all about his body and mind. This means he found himself in this big world. So our activity should be limitlessly small, and at the same time it should be limitlessly large. Two directions at the same time. There's no difference in the greatness of our activity and what may be a small, trivial activity. There's an expression that a tiger catches a mouse with all its strength. It doesn't discriminate and think, oh, it's a tiny, unimportant little mouse, I'll just reach out. It goes after it with everything it has. That's right effort. There's no difference in the greatness of our activity and what may be a trivial, small activity. We have, They have the same value, the great and the small. Our pleasure and conscience will be fully supported by this big realm. The way to see this, the way to dwell on all of this, is to calm our mind. That's why we sit Zazen. Don't be fooled by homemade contradictions. We make the contradictions. The world itself has none. I think maybe that's enough for today. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. Thank you all very much for coming. I'll see you next time, I hope. And let me know how you enjoy these Suzuki Roshi chats. Thank you very much.